The gates of Redwater Correctional Facility groaned open like the mouth of some ancient beast. On the other side, under the harsh Alabama sun, stood a woman whose presence made even the guards shift uneasily. She wore the standard-issue orange jumpsuit like it was a second skin, loose, creased, and yet strangely regal on her narrow frame. Her name was Lena Briggs, inmate number 4932, and from the moment she stepped onto that sun-scorched pavement, it was clear Lena wasn't like the others. She had no tattoos, no scars to boast of, and she didn't speak unless spoken to. Her hair, a dark river curls braided tightly against her scalp, framed sharp cheekbones and eyes so still they could silence a room. The intake officer said she didn't flinch once. Not during the strip search, not during the medical check, not even when they snapped her mugshot. She looked straight into the camera, her expression unreadable, like she already knew how this would end. Warden Russell Hensley watched her through the surveillance monitors as she was led down the hallway to cell block C. He leaned forward slightly in his chair, narrowing his eyes. There was something about her, the way she walked like she didn't belong in shackles, like she was just passing through. Russell had seen hardened killers and broken women. Lena was neither. She was something else, something dangerous wrapped in silence. She's the one from Montgomery, right? Deputy Warden Sheila asked, her arms crossed. Russell nodded, still watching. HIV positive. Assault with intent. Suspected of blackmailing two lawyers but never charged. She pled out. 12 years. Sheila scoffed. And they send her here? Russell didn't answer. He was already too intrigued. Lena's cell was small and smelled of bleach and iron. Her cellmate, a woman named Rosalie with prison eyes and twitchy fingers, took one look at her and muttered under her breath, "Great. Another quiet one." But Lena wasn't quiet out of fear. She listened, observed. She'd learned early in life that the ones who talked too much died the loudest. Within her first week, she mapped the rhythm of Redwater. The times guards changed shifts, which inmates ruled a rec yard, who snuck pills in their socks, and who cried themselves to sleep. At night, when the block settled into its dull, buzzing silence, Lena stared at the ceiling and counted backwards from 500. It was a ritual, a habit she'd picked up during the trial, when the prosecutor called her calculated, and the courtroom whispered words like deceitful and diseased. The only person who never called her anything was Marcus, her husband. He just sat there in the gallery, stone-faced, not even blinking as she was sentenced to 12 years. 12 years for covering up his crime. But that was a lifetime ago. This was Redwater now. And Redwater had rules. Within the first month, stories about Lena began to surface. Some said she used to be a preacher's wife. Others claimed she was an escort who knew secrets about men in suits with too much power. But it was the third story, the one whispered through cell block toilets and cafeteria tables, that stirred the most interest. She seduced a judge, gave him HIV on purpose. Whether it was true didn't matter. In Redwater, truth was just a story with confidence behind it. And Lena carried herself with enough certainty to make even the most brutal inmates keep their distance. Except Warden Hensley. He started showing up in places he didn't belong, wandering down cell block C during count, lingering in the cafeteria just as Lena finished her meal. He told himself it was coincidence. He told his staff he was monitoring high-risk inmates. But late at night, when he locked his office and pulled out her intake file, he couldn't lie to himself. Lena fascinated him, not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because she was untouched by the place. She didn't scowl like the others, didn't beg for favors, didn't break down in chapel. She simply existed, unshaken, untouched. It made Russell feel something he hadn't in years. Curiosity. And curiosity was dangerous for a man in his position. One evening, during a surprise cell inspection, Warden Hensley paused outside cell C-17. Lena stood inside, arms behind her back, her eyes already on him before he even knocked. "I trust the accommodations have been tolerable?" he asked, voice low. Lena looked him over once. "It's prison," she said. "Comfort's not in the contract." He smirked. Fair enough. He should have walked away, should have nodded and moved on. But something held him there, like a rope around his ankle pulling him toward her. He stepped inside the cell, just enough for the shadows to wrap around them. "You've been quiet," he said. "Is that a problem?" "Depends," he replied. "Some of the quiet ones are planning things." Lena's gaze never wavered. "And some of the loud ones are just scared." He chuckled, but his eyes stayed hard. "You're not scared of me." "No," she said. "But maybe you should be scared of me." It wasn't a threat. It was a mirror, and for a second, Russell saw himself reflected back, his career, his secrets, the married man who had once slept with a former inmate and buried the fallout. He cleared his throat and stepped back into the hallway. "I'll be watching," he said. "You already are," she whispered. The rumors intensified. By the third month, the guards joked about it behind closed doors. "The warden's got a new pet," they'd say, but no one laughed too loud, because things at Redwater were shifting. Lena had a power that wasn't physical. It was quieter, slower, a tide, not a wave, and tides pull everything under. Then it started happening. Private meetings, closed-door conversations. The night shift guard who swore he saw the warden leaving the infirmary at 2 a.m., shirt untucked and lips swollen. The bottle of HIV medication that went missing from a nurse's station. The smirk on Lena's face the next morning that made even the chapel feel colder. Something was happening, something that couldn't be undone. And deep within Redwater's concrete walls, a game was beginning, one where power, secrets, and disease were the weapons. And Lena Briggs had just made her first move. It began with a note, a simple square of yellowed paper folded with precision. It arrived during a random cell sweep, slipped beneath Lena Briggs' mattress by a guard who never made eye contact. There were no words, just a time and place scrawled in pencil. 2:15 a.m. infirmary. Lena stared at the note for a long while, her face unreadable. Then, one by one, she tore into quarters and pressed each dry scrap past her lips, chewing slowly before swallowing. She drank a sip of water and lay back on her cot, arms crossed behind her head. Her eyes remained open, wide, calculating. It wasn't fear that filled her chest. It was certainty. Warden Russell Hensley had always walked a fine line between control and craving. But Lena? She wasn't a line. She was gravity. And the closer he drew to her, the more everything around him, his marriage, his career, his control, was pulled inward, collapsing like a star into something darker. That night, as the facility's hum dulled into silence, Lena rose without sound. She moved through shadows like she lived in them her entire life, and perhaps she had. In Redwater, quiet was power. Quiet meant you were invisible. And Lena had mastered that art. She wore no makeup, no perfume, nothing but the sterile scent of concrete and sweat and time. And yet, when she stepped into the infirmary, Warden Hensley forgot how to breathe. The infirmary was a small clinical space, lined with locked cabinets and peeling posters that no one read. The hum of the fluorescent lights cast an eerie glow across the white tile floor, and in the center stood Russell, shirt collar open, tie undone. He didn't speak at first, just watched as Lena entered and slowly shut the door behind her. "You came," he said, voice lower than usual. "You asked," she replied, voice softer than necessary. He gestured to a stool by the examination table, but she didn't move. Instead, she stepped closer, stopping just short of him. The tension in the room tightened like a rope between them, frayed and dangerous. "I could lose everything," he muttered, half to her, half to himself. Lena leaned in slightly, her eyes never leaving his. "Then maybe you never had anything to begin with." He reached for her then, like a man giving in to the devil he'd prayed to forget. Their kiss wasn't tender. It was desperate, reckless. The kind of kiss that only exists in places where guilt outweighs love, where shame lingers on your skin long after the heat has faded. And as they moved deeper into the room, his hands clumsy, hers unflinching, Lena wasn't thinking about romance. She was thinking about survival. The next day, she was different. Calm, colder. She sat through breakfast like nothing had happened. She spoke to no one, but something in her gaze had shifted, like a woman holding a weapon no one could see. The guards noticed first. Then the inmates. Even Rosalie, her twitchy cellmate, whispered, "You're glowing like a woman with secrets." Lena said nothing. Secrets were currency, and she was finally rich. For weeks it continued. Always the same time, always the infirmary. They never spoke of feelings. They didn't pretend it was more. But Warden Hensley began to change. He became erratic, short-tempered with staff, overly protective when Lena's name came up. He halted her transfer to a medical ward without explanation. He personally supervised her reviews. And behind closed doors, he promised things he couldn't keep. "You'll be out early," he whispered once, brushing a curl from her face. "I'll talk to the board." Lena only smiled. She knew better than to believe a man's mouth when his hands were already guilty. But power, like lust, is never invisible for long. The guards began talking. One night, Deputy Warden Sheila found Lena's name listed on an infirmary roster. With no incident, no paperwork, no explanation. She confronted Russell. He laughed it off. But she wasn't blind. Soon after, a nurse noticed bottles missing from the medication cabinet, specifically antiretrovirals. A whisper began to snake its way through Redwater's walls. Not a rumor, a warning. And then Lena got careless. Or maybe she didn't. Maybe she wanted to be seen. One evening, after lights out, she passed Russell in the hallway. No one else was around. And without hesitation, she reached out and gently touched the inside of his wrist. Just for a second, long enough for the camera above them to catch it, long enough for the prison to feel the quake beneath its foundation. The next morning, she was pulled into solitary. Russell didn't speak to her for 2 days. When he finally entered her isolation cell, he didn't say a word, just stared at her through the bars, his face pale and drawn. She sat cross-legged on the floor, her hands in her lap, her eyes still and unreadable. "You used me," he said hoarsely. "You offered," she replied. "I gave you everything." "No," she corrected. "You gave me access." He swallowed hard. His mind was racing now. She hadn't told anyone. She hadn't needed to. Redwater was watching. And now, so were the feds. "You're HIV positive," he said finally, almost like a question. She tilted her head. "You never asked." He stepped back from the bars, hands trembling. The silence between them was deafening. And then she said the words that would haunt him forever. "Now you know how it feels to be infected by something you trusted." Russell didn't return to the cell again. Within days, Internal Affairs launched an inquiry. Staff were interviewed. Logs were reviewed. And Lena? She waited, because justice, like revenge, was a slow disease. And she had already begun the infection. Redwater Prison had always run on a thin line of denial, the kind of place where silence was easier than truth, where shame was more tolerable than scandal. But all that changed the day the medical wing received a confidential envelope, stamped and sealed from Montgomery. Inside were 3 sheets of paper, a signature, and a reality no one wanted to face. Warden Russell Hensley tested positive for HIV. The news didn't just rattle the institution. It detonated it. He had gone to the lab in secret, driving 2 counties over, using a fake name and cash in hand. He hadn't slept in days. His gums bled when he brushed. He told himself it was stress. But deep down, he already knew. And the moment the technician folded her lips into a sympathetic line, his world split clean down the center. The man who once stood at the pulpit of prison discipline, who lectured new recruits about strength and moral fiber, now found himself sitting alone in a locked bathroom stall, hand covering his mouth, shaking so hard his badge fell from his belt. And yet, the physical sickness was nothing compared to what he felt when he realized the timeline. He had only been with one person, Lena Briggs, the inmate, the woman he had loved, abused, protected, and exploited, all tangled into one shameful knot. He wanted to scream, but screaming would mean exposure. It would mean confessing everything. The affair, the manipulation, the late-night meetings, the way he'd changed records and falsified logs just to get close to her. He could already see the headlines. Warden contracts HIV from inmate lover. It was the kind of story that ruins legacies. But even worse than the scandal was a seed of doubt burrowing deep into his spine. Had she done it on purpose? Was this revenge? Retaliation? Or had she just never cared whether he lived or died? For 3 days he called in sick. Then he returned to Redwater with a smile so strained it looked carved from stone. Meanwhile, Lena was already a legend. Word spread through the inmate grapevine like fire. Lena Briggs had brought down the warden. No one knew exactly how, but they didn't need the details. In prison, power shifts fast. And Lena had flipped the entire system on its head without a knife or a riot. She'd done it with her body, her silence, and a kind of patience that scared people. Her cellmate, Rosalie, watched her closely. "You really did it, didn't you?" she whispered one night. Lena didn't answer. She just leaned back against the cinder block wall, eyes half-lidded. She had nothing left to prove. And yet, deep inside, she wasn't celebrating. She was waiting, because she knew this wasn't the end. This was the middle. The test results had opened the floodgates. Internal affairs returned to Redwater, this time with subpoenas. Russell was pulled into a windowless room with 2 cold investigators and a tape recorder. He denied everything. They showed him camera footage. He asked for a break. They said no. "You had sexual relations with an inmate. That alone is a federal offense," the lead agent said, his tone flat. "I was manipulated," Russell replied, voice cracking. "She seduced me." The agent raised a brow. "She's serving a 15-year sentence for stabbing her husband in the neck with a garden trowel. You thought she wouldn't stab you in the back, too." Russell clenched his fists. He wanted to explain it. How she made him feel needed. How her voice made the prison feel like less of a cage. But all that sounded pathetic now. And the part he hated most was this. Even after everything, part of him still wanted her. Still yearned for that electricity when she touched his wrist or stared him down from across the infirmary. Lena wasn't just poison. She was addictive. Back in the medical wing, the testing expanded. Every staff member who'd had private access to inmates was called in. Every inmate with a medical record cross-referenced. Redwater was undergoing a full forensic audit, but Lena's name kept rising to the surface like a bloodstain under bleach. She had been in the infirmary 17 times in 8 months. Always at night. Always logged under urgent, with no injuries reported. Then came the second bombshell. 2 additional officers tested positive. A correctional nurse, female, age 38, and a guard, male, 29, who swore he'd never even spoken to Lena. But they couldn't deny the medical reports. Someone had been spreading the virus, and Lena was at the center of the web. Warden Hensley spiraled. He began drinking in the evenings, locking himself in his office. He stopped returning calls from his wife. Every night he stared at his reflection and saw not a leader, but a fool. He was supposed to be the one in control. Instead, he was the example they'd use in seminars. Don't be like Warden Hensley. And yet, a darker truth clawed at the corners of his mind. What if she had wanted to get caught? What if the entire thing, every touch, every breathy whisper, was designed not out of lust, but vengeance? He went back through her file. Back to the beginning. Lena Briggs, age 29, convicted of second-degree murder. The victim? Her husband, Marvin Briggs, a former corrections officer at another state prison, Redwater's sister facility. Russell hadn't remembered that detail before. He hadn't paid attention. Marvin had assaulted her. There were bruises, hospital reports, a restraining order ignored. But in the trial, it all came down to a kitchen fight gone wrong. She'd stabbed him 5 times in the neck. He died at the scene. Russell's hands trembled as he read the transcript. What if this wasn't about sex at all? What if this was about poetic revenge? Not just on her abuser, but on the system that failed to protect her from him. She had suffered in silence, been caged, been ignored, until she found the one crack in the prison walls. Him. He thought she was the one infected. But maybe he had been the disease all along. The investigators returned to Lena's cell. This time, they didn't ask questions. They offered a deal, testify against the warden, admit to sexual contact, and she could shave years off her sentence. Lena just smiled. That slow, quiet smile that said she knew how all of this would end. "I'm already free," she whispered. "I was the moment he touched me." And for the first time, they realized She wasn't the victim. She was the executioner. Redwater Prison didn't sleep. At night, it simmered. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly through concrete halls. Guards walked their rounds, boots echoing in predictable rhythm. And somewhere deep in cell block E, Lena Briggs sat awake, legs crossed, hands folded neatly in her lap like a woman waiting for confession. By now, everyone in the prison knew her name. The officers whispered it behind closed doors. The inmates watched her with reverence and fear. Even the warden, once her secret lover, now her silent enemy, couldn't walk past her cell without looking away. Lena had become myth and weapon all in one. But myths, no matter how powerful, still bleed. On a cold Thursday morning, her body was found lifeless on the thin mattress of her solitary cell. No signs of struggle, no marks on her neck, no blood, no bruises, nothing that screamed violence. Just Lena, lying perfectly still, lips slightly parted, eyes closed, like she was finally at peace. At 6:07 a.m., the alarm was triggered. At 6:13 a.m., nurses arrived, too late. By 6:32 a.m., she was pronounced dead. The prison fell silent. The warden, Russell Hensley, stared at the coroner's report like it was written in a foreign language. No signs of foul play. Probable cause of death: internal complications due to advanced untreated HIV infection. He wanted to believe it, but something gnawed at him. Lena Briggs was not the kind of woman who went down quietly. She was strategic, meticulous, always 3 steps ahead. Her silence was never surrender. It was set up. For months, she walked the fine edge of danger with a calm that unnerved even the most hardened inmates. To think she just gave up? He didn't buy it. And neither did Internal Affairs. When they reopened the investigation into her death, they started with the obvious: who had access to her cell. A list of names was compiled: guards, medical staff, even kitchen workers. But Redwater was a place where records had a way of disappearing. Cameras stopped working at convenient times. Logs were altered. And someone had shut off a surveillance feed to her block for a mysterious maintenance check just 2 hours before her body was discovered. Coincidence? No one believed that. But no one spoke up either. Lena's death changed the atmosphere of Redwater forever. Inmates, once rowdy and loud, moved in nervous silence. Some wept. Others kept their eyes on the ground like prisoners in mourning. Her death wasn't just a loss. It was a message. And what that message meant depended on who you asked. To some, Lena had been a warrior, a woman who'd used her body and mind to flip the entire system on its head, infecting the warden, exposing corruption, and proving no one was untouchable. To others, she was a warning that the walls of Redwater could crush anyone, even the fiercest among them. To the guards, she was a liability finally erased. And to Russell Hensley, she was a ghost that wouldn't go away. The funeral was denied. She had no family to claim the body. Her mother had passed 3 years into her sentence. No siblings, no children, no one to bury her. So Lena Briggs was cremated at the county's expense. No ceremony, no prayers. But 1 week later, a letter arrived. It was addressed to Warden Hensley. No return address, no name. Inside, a single sheet of paper. You said I'd never leave these walls. But now I live in your blood and your sleep, forever. Russell dropped the paper, like it had teeth. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe an inmate got hold of her old journals. Maybe it was a prank. But the handwriting, it was hers. Slanted, sharp, unmistakably Lena. He burned the letter that night, and he started locking his bedroom door. Weeks passed, then a month, and slowly, the questions grew louder. How did Lena get the virus in the first place? Had she known all along she was positive? Why did she wait so long to tell anyone? And why did 3 other staff members, including a nurse, a guard, and a chaplain, test positive shortly after her death? What kind of power did she really hold? Internal Affairs theorized that Lena had weaponized her own body, that she seduced her captors not out of love, but out of vengeance, that every kiss, every touch, was a countdown. Some called it biological warfare. Others called it justice. Either way, she had succeeded. The The warden was removed from duty on medical leave, his reputation tarnished, his body deteriorating, his mind unraveling. One night, alone in his house, Russell found a second letter tucked under his pillow. I didn't kill you. I let you live, because hell is waking up with me still inside you. He screamed until the neighbors called the police. Meanwhile, at Redwater, something strange happened. Inmate graffiti began to appear on the walls. Not words, symbols. A triangle with a drop of blood in the center. No one confessed to drawing it. But soon it was everywhere. Carved into cafeteria tables, scratched into cell doors, even drawn in lipstick on the mirror of the women's washroom. They called it the mark of Briggs. Even in death, Lena was more alive than ever. She had become an idea, a symbol of defiance, a ghost that haunted the institution long after her body was gone. 3 months later, Redwater Prison was placed under federal investigation. Dozens of cases were reopened. 5 guards were suspended. 2 resigned. Russell Hensley never returned to work. His house was found abandoned, personal belongings untouched. On the wall of his bedroom, written in red ink, were 4 chilling words. She never really died. They said the dead can't speak. But Lena Briggs made sure her voice would echo long after her last breath. It began with a small brown envelope, postmarked the day before her body was found. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, and unmistakably hers. It arrived at the Birmingham office of investigative journalist Camille Dorsey, a woman who had tried for years to expose the corruption at Redwater Correctional. The envelope was marked only with 2 words. Tell them. Inside was a letter. 6 pages. Written in black ink. The strokes pressed so hard they nearly tore through paper. It wasn't just a letter. It was a confession. But not the kind that begged for forgiveness. No. Lena's words bled with intent. With fury. With finality. They locked up my body, but they never got my mind. They never took my memory. I gave them sickness because they gave me silence. The letter detailed everything. Names, dates, moments stolen in the warden's office. The cold ceramic sink where he first touched her. The promises he whispered while tightening his belt. She wrote of how he fed her attention like a drug, only to let her rot when she became too inconvenient. But more chilling than her experiences with the warden was her reasoning. He thought he could use me, then discard me like scraps. But I am not scraps. I'm the poison they planted and forgot to pull out. Lena knew she had HIV before the affair began. She never disclosed it. And while she didn't explicitly say she infected Warden Russell Hensley on purpose, the implications were painted in blood. Camille read it once, then again, and then she wept. The next morning, Redwater was on the front page of every paper in Alabama. TV crews camped outside its gates. Protesters lined the prison fence, some chanting Lena's name, others calling her a monster. But the most haunting detail wasn't the confession itself. It was what came after. On the final page of the letter, Lena wrote, I am not afraid to die. I've been dying every day in here. But I want the world to know I died standing. A second envelope was found in Lena's cell, addressed to her younger brother, Jamal. Inside was a photograph. Lena, 15 years old, holding a basketball trophy and beaming. The smile of someone who hadn't yet tasted betrayal. The note on the back read, Tell Mama I still dream of the sun. The autopsy was inconclusive. Officials claimed she died of internal bleeding, likely from untreated ulcers. But the guard said she was fine the night before. Other inmates swore they heard screams. Redwater's surveillance system, conveniently, had a malfunction that night. No one was ever charged. But the journalistic firestorm of her confession, unleashed, couldn't be contained. Warden Russell Hensley resigned 2 months later, citing health complications. Rumors of his HIV status swirled in hushed conversations. At country clubs, inside statehouse bathrooms, across courtroom benches. He was never seen publicly again. 1 year later, Camille Dorsey published Lena's full letter. It was titled Cell Block Silence, the final words of Lena Briggs. The book became a bestseller. The proceeds went to Lena's family. Jamal Briggs used the money to open a nonprofit in Montgomery. The Briggs Project aimed at protecting incarcerated women from sexual abuse by prison staff. Their motto was simple: we believe her. To this day, former inmates at Redwater speak Lena's name in reverence, not as a victim, but as a warning. They write her quotes on cell walls, pass her story down like gospel. And every now and then, in the deepest hours of night, a new inmate says they see her, a shadow of a woman pacing outside cell 19, eyes glowing, whispering through vents. Tell them. Because even in death, Lena Briggs was never silent.